The Sine Institute of Policy and Politics is American University's incubator for policy innovation. We convene leaders in the academic, public, private, nonprofit, and journalism sectors to engage and promote common ground and nonpartisan solutions. In an evolving world, we seize the opportunity to work on the nation's most pressing challenges through collaboration by experts and top scholars in their field with students in research and scholarship. As part of that goal, the Sine Institute leverages American University's location in our nation's capital, the nexus of government and a growing international business center. We connect diverse perspectives from around the country and around the world with our world-class academics and research, experienced practitioners, and the most politically active student body in the U.S. We stand apart through our focus on the role of business and the nonprofit community in public policy, the rise of the importance of economic regions in the United States, and international policy issues. Our focus is to make an immediate impact at the intersection of policy and politics that leads to real and lasting change. Thank you for joining us as we convene, communicate, and collaborate. Introducing Sine Institute 2022 Fellow Mustafa Santiago Ali.
Thank you, Amy, and welcome everyone to the fight for environmental justice and climate justice in the 21st century. I want to thank the Sine Institute for Policy and Politics for hosting this event and all of the members of our Sine Fellows 2022 class. I also got to give a big shout out to the folks who really make this happen, the Sine Student Associates. And today's particular seminar is focused on revitalizing vulnerable communities, and it's being led by both Chris Burning and Benjamin Robb. They have done an amazing job. And of course, they are supported by the other amazing students who have been a part of our series: Will Desmond, Julieta Marino, Matthew Zito, Amaya Jones, Robert Roseman, and of course, my right hand and left hand, who's really held it all together, Christina Barnes, who's our graduate assistant. So we want to give a special thank you and shout out to each and every one of you. Today, we are diving deep on revitalizing vulnerable communities. We often hear about the impact side of the equation, the atrocities that have happened in African American, Latinx, Indigenous, Asian and Pacific Islander, and lower wealth communities, from pollution, from the climate crisis, and from the decisions that have been made in the policy paradigm. But today, we are also focusing on how are we revitalizing our communities? How are we helping folks move from surviving to thriving? How are we also addressing the trauma and moving to transformation? We have three amazing individuals. And when I say amazing, it's because they have actually been able to be on the ground, helping to develop the processes, the tools, addressing the wealth gap that exists inside of our communities, helping to make sure that we have adequate housing that is healthy and sustainable, new transportation routes, and a number of other dynamics that are incredibly important if we are truly going to build safe, sustainable, and holistic communities that have a number of positive aspects that are happening inside of them. And the three gentlemen today know a whole lot about that and a number of other subjects. And so without that being said, I want to get started, and I want to actually begin to unpack many of these really amazing sets of opportunities that are in front of us. So I would like to invite into our conversation now both Jimmy Moore. Jimmy Moore is the CEO of Bridge Tech, and also has a number of other initiatives that I won't get in front of, and I'll let him talk to you about, because you're just going to be blown away by the things that are happening in that space. And then, of course, my brother Derrick Evans from Turkey Creek with the Turkey Creek Initiative. Many of you probably have seen the movie of the amazing work that has happened there, both in the moment and some amazing future opportunities. So we're going to bring Derrick into the conversation here in 1 second. And then hopefully we will also have Harold Mitchell, a story that some of you may have heard of: Spartanburg, South Carolina, the Regenesis Project that was able to leverage the $20,000 environmental justice small grant into over $300 million in changes. So we've got a suite of different ways of approaching the needs inside of our communities in a very effective way. So first of all, welcome, Jimmy. I believe you're still on mute, and then also welcome, Derrick.
Thank you, guys. Glad to be here.
All right. So Jimmy, I'm gonna come to you first. Derrick, I'm gonna come to you with the same question. And then if we have others join us, we'll pose that question to them. Jimmy, when you think about revitalizing vulnerable communities, what does that mean to you? What does that look like?
Well, that's a great question. And for me, it's always been about breaking it down to first principle point of view, which keep it simple. For me, it was always about education, because as you know, education is the foundation of wealth. So I like to use environmental as a vehicle, but education is definitely a tool that we can use to achieve what we need to do within our community. My whole goal in the last 5 or 6 years has also been focused on economic opportunities for the community and coming up with plans on how we can use these economic opportunities within the space of STEM, which is engineering and education, which is my focus, to deliver that for the community. So that's my approach to the environmental justice movement and climate change.
Thank you for that. Derrick, same question.
Thank you. When I hear, when you ask me what does revitalizing vulnerable community mean to me, first of all, vulnerable means that every problem is a potential solution. It's not just your short or long list of challenges, but also the potential opportunities that those challenges and those challenges alone may present. And that weaving them together in a holistic, place-based approach is the only viable path to what you could genuinely call revitalizing.
Without a doubt. Just let me also highlight that Ben is with us. Ben, one of the student associates, will also be asking some questions as we move forward. I want to also, as part of our framing, Derrick, if you could talk a little bit about Turkey Creek, the history of Turkey Creek, and some of the things that you all have been able to put in place to address, some of the past disinvestments and disparities that have been going on.
Sure. And as you know, Mustafa, that's a very long, winding, and multi-stranded story. But suffice it to say that Turkey Creek is what you would call a freedmen's settlement. It was founded in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War and the emancipation of previously enslaved African-American people. It has also, since its very beginning, been particularly located just 3 miles north of the Gulf of Mexico, as well as in the state of Mississippi, which are two contextual issues, if you will, that have always governed how the people, I'm the 6th generation, and now we're up to 8 generations, the people of Turkey Creek have struggled, strived, survived, and sometimes, like I say, thrived. In recent years, because of coastal sprawl, annexation, non-enforcement of existing federal laws, particularly in places like Mississippi, as well as natural climate change and intensifying hurricanes and worsening vulnerability for everyone in the region. Turkey Creek was a place in 1994 that had recently been annexed by a city to its south without a vote by the community, and lost generations of autonomy in terms of, formal or frankly, mostly informal community development, but commonsensical and sustainable community development. I think it's reflective in that sense of a lot of communities of color and in isolated places. In the ensuing years, since I returned to my native community, which I hadn't lived in 20 years, I was in Boston, had a career as an educator, But in the period 2-3 years before Hurricane Katrina, which was 2005, Hurricane Katrina, I returned home, and with my family members and neighbors and like-minded folk from near and far, founded and developed Turkey Creek Community Initiatives with an S, and that's very important, with an S. Because as I said earlier in response to your first question, I quickly discovered and have since discovered even further that this community, despite its small size, had a list of virtually every social, environmental, racial, economic, educational ailment that you could list in extreme local kind and degree. And so it was very clear from the inception that this would need to be a place where we took every one of those challenges and problems and began to think about them in terms of potential solutions and potential contributors to those solutions. Because it really took that very ambitious and broad view, which, as you know, is very similar to what Harold Mitchell and the folks in Spartanburg have done. I'm proud to say that I think of Turkey Creek and Spartanburg as kind of like twin sisters, you know, that have taken that outlook.
Thank you for that, Derrick. Jimmy, I want to come to you. You know, I remember when I brought folks from the White House down to South Carolina, and I was exposed to the amazing students that you were working with. I mean, I was just blown away at the knowledge that they had. And I know a lot of that is due to you and the other team that you pulled together. Can you share with folks about the journey of Bridge Tech, why it was needed, and some of the things that have come out of that could be replicated across our country if folks decided to?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I want to say it wasn't me that came up with the concept of Bridge Tech. So I appreciate the opportunity to share the story. As you know, I'm a product of North Carolina A&T, go Aggies. But during that time, I had the opportunity to work on the Student Space Shuttle program, which was started by Ronald McNair, which was the astronaut, as you guys know, that we fatally lost aboard the space shuttle. But Dr. Ahrens, his physics teacher, loved this guy. When I say love, he worshiped everything that Ronald accomplished. And it was during this phase, these couple of years of being able to work on this program where we actually launched a payload into the space shuttle, that Dr. Ahrens told all of us, it was a small group, maybe 24 students, that it's on us to pass forward because this is what Ron would want it. So to come up with a program similar to what we have in A&T that we can take back to the community and build the next Ron McNair is what he used to say. But what he was trying to tell us, take what we know. We don't have to know everything. Take what we know, go back and build from there. So as being an engineering student, with all this experience that I gained through him and working with him with NASA and all the detailed components that we had to go through, Bridge Tech was born. So I came home in upstate South Carolina in Greenville, and I did a lot of what I think is good for a lot of students. I did a lot of volunteering at first. But I quickly got frustrated because I have been exposed to A&T and Dr. Ahrens and how things are supposed to be done. And I think a lot of time in our community, we are our own worst enemy because we don't know what to ask for or we don't know what to do with what we have. And so for me, it was more about give me $1,500 so I can do A, B, and C for the next 2 weeks, or versus give me this $20,000 worth of equipment and let me turn my own money above that. So I witnessed that a couple of times when I was volunteering. And so I stopped, I got with a couple partners in Greenville, and we actually bought a facility. It was a juvenile justice system that was built and housed for detaining young men in our community. And we turned it into a STEM camp. It's in the heart of Greenville, South Carolina, probably the best investment I ever made. And from there, we started to use and work on real world projects. So we started out with small robotics and things like that, but we quickly transferred to the future, which is climate change initiatives. So we did a lot of solar farms. I got with GE and we built a wind turbine. We did some wind farms just to get them acclimated to these are the technologies that's behind that. And so we are quickly shifting over now into AI, IoT, and automation because that's what the future is. And when I say the future, that means that's where all the economic prosperity for the future is going to lie. And if we don't get ahead of that, or at least stay on par with that, and then we're going to constantly be behind. In the case of point, the dot-com boom made millions and millions of millionaires. I think less than 1% came out of our community because we were slow to get to that topic and to that knowledge that by the time we was able to get into it, it was over. We got a new opportunity with this infrastructure, especially with climate change. There's tons of problems out there dealing with climate change, but there's tons of solutions. And no one has all the answers, but it's not a limited amount of solutions that we can provide, or products that can be out there that can solve this. So I think we got a golden age. I would love to be 30 years younger than I was. I tell all my students that today. I would love to be 30 years younger right now because it's an exciting time to be part of the solution for this. And for me, being in the corporate world, I have network and partnership with a lot of Fortune 100, 200 companies that's willing to help. But we have to have a plan. And that plan always, for me, is always a technical solution. So that's what I like to say about that.
No, I appreciate that. You might want to also just highlight the ages of the students who've been a part of your program, because I was amazed at some of the babies who were doing just like stuff, you know, that you often don't get a chance to do till you're in college.
Well, on that one, that was a little deviation that I started because that came from my childhood. As you know, Mustafa, from our age and below, we learned everything from our fathers and our uncles. And that started really from the time we can walk. I mean, I was working on cars in the 4th grade and things like that. Didn't know what I was doing, but I knew how to hand the tools. I know what the tools were. So from Bridge Tech, that's where we start. We started in the 5th and 6th grade, but we usually keep our students, the same students, throughout their college and professional career. A lot of them come back even after they graduate from college. And that's so we can keep that sustained learning, because engineering is not a 6-month, 3-month, you know, it's not a curriculum that you can get done in that time. It's really a lifetime. You learn every day. And so all of our students go off and graduate. They're doing great things, but I tell them the same thing Dr. Aarons tell me. Now, what are you going to do? So no matter where you at, you have to give back. We do start young, and we try to keep them as long as they're willing to stay with us.
I appreciate that. Derrick, you know, I've been to Turkey Creek. There are a lot of treasures in Turkey Creek. So we're going to talk a little bit here in a second, you know, about, you know, all the money that's moving, you know, through the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the new proposed budgets and all these other types of things. We often don't talk enough about the treasures that already exist inside of our communities and why we have to protect them, why we have to revitalize them, why we have to do a number of different things. Can you talk about the treasures that already existed or exist in Turkey Creek, and what some of the ways that you are holding on to those and the folks who have been a part of the journey?
Well, you know, as with Jimmy and Bridge Tech and that philosophy and modus operandi, our intergenerational wealth is always our first and most valuable wealth that we must retain and capitalize and build. And it's really wonderful. I hope the audience is really taking note of how, you know, while on the one hand, it would be great for myself as well to be 30 years younger. It's also important that I am that bridge, that as Bridge Tech is, you know, that remembers, you know, all policy opportunities, challenges locally or whatever, essentially do have Old and New Testaments, right? That you have to grow and consolidate both throughout. And bringing that to Turkey Creek, the first treasure is the people and the stewards of community knowledge and wisdom. Again, I hadn't lived here for 20 years. I left in the 10th grade to attend school elsewhere. And then I started a career elsewhere before I returned home to Turkey Creek. And Turkey Creek, ironically, in part because of disinvestment and neglect and poverty of various kinds over the years, still actually retained some of the cultural features that would have been redeveloped and eliminated in a different, maybe an urban context or a northern context. So there was really good, strong historical, cultural, and ultimately for the future, valuable planning elements to work with. So we've placed an emphasis here on not only what was most threatened and challenged, but was our greatest hope for driving a broader revitalization, which is our ecological and our historical cultural heritage. So for instance, the Yaryan Phoenix Naval Stores Paymaster's office, which was once the paymaster's office of a turpentine plant that exploited African-American workers, exploited the natural environment, polluted and denuded the Gulf coastal plain from the Carolinas to Texas of the native long needle pine, was a building that still stood barely in Turkey Creek. But it is a symbol of all of those things. And we've recently been able to restore it to its original condition, including the segregated front and back doors, black and white in the paymaster's window, where these workers from this community and nearby communities, Black workers, risked life and limb daily, to put food on the table, coins in the collection plate, and membership dues in the NAACP. The old segregated colored school here in Turkey Creek, where my mama and her father attended school in the 1930s and 40s, and up until it was a Head Start facility we've recently acquired for conversion and repurposing, restoration as a community, and even a regional asset for teaching and learning the types of things that Bridge Tech and the Spartanburg story and our story here down on the Gulf Coast have to teach near and far, right? And then finally, I think most of all, the creek itself, the watershed, the drainage basin. Prior to coming home, I was a historian and an educator with an emphasis on civil rights history. I had been a researcher for the Eyes on the Prize film series. And like all environmentalists, I wasn't born one, I became one out of necessity and out of circumstance. And that then opened up, as it does, so many different new lenses for how to integrate the challenges and the opportunities that occur in a place or in a space. And with the creek, something as disastrous as the BP oil spill actually produced, through the Clean Water Act fines, a very large pool of money for the explicit purpose of coastal restoration, which, if properly utilized, not only restores habitats on the creek, but also in our part of the country, from Florida to Texas, these coastal tidal bayous and estuaries like Turkey Creek, or like Hog Bayou in Africatown in Alabama, or the bayou adjacent to Lower Ninth Ward and Buffalo Bayou in Houston. These are all, not only are they within the mapped footprint of who is eligible for restoration dollars from the BP oil spill, but they also happen to be mandated but unfunded locations of legacy, Superfund, and RCRA contamination. So now you have an opportunity, if folks would seize it, right? And sort of the elder experience and vision is paired with the new energy and enthusiasm about climate justice and resiliency. There's an opportunity to solve decades and generations worth of unaddressed, unresolved environmental and therefore social and economic, et cetera, problems in these communities on the Gulf Coastal Plain.
Thank you for that, Derrick. Appreciate it. I want to honor the bridge that we've talked about today that has been built. And I want to bring Ben into the conversation. Ben's one of our amazing student associates, and he has some questions that he wanted to begin to unpack with you as well. So Ben, let me pass the mic to you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Ali. Thank you all, Mr. Moore and Mr. Evans, for your time and your insights into how we can help revitalize vulnerable communities. My first question is for Mr. Moore. How does the Bridge Tech obtain the appropriate amount of funding to service the K through 12 STEM educational program? I'm sure it must cost a lot, so I'm wondering how that all works out, if there's sponsors and such.
That's an excellent question. First of all, it's very expensive to deal in the technology that we deal with. But like I said, where there's a will, there's a way. We do have some funders, and the actual students do pay some type of stipend or some type of fee during the summers. But we are reaching out more and more to our corporate partners, which is starting to step up, and we are actually starting to do projects. So let me step back and give you an understanding of what that means. I put the ownership on the parents to pay for us to train them. But once they are trained, and I'm saying once they get 16 and 17, then it should be on us to provide jobs where they're working on real world projects. So that's the bread and butter of the Bridge Tech. So currently we have a couple of job opportunities or true job automation engineering projects that we have out of this company out of Florida that would like for us to just automate their whole facility. So this still take a lot of engineering, but we do partner with universities like Bob Jones University, North Carolina A&T, and local communities like GE and their engineers to come and help us figure out some obstacles that we may have. But once we design it, the students are heavily involved in the testing, the documentation, the implementation, and at the same time, we get funding because we deliver the product. And so that helps also our budget and what we do. And so again, it's always a yin and a yang, a give and a take when we're dealing with that, especially with Bridge Tech. And I think this is a perfect model for what we can do economically across the US and across the world.
A follow-up question to that for you, Mr. Moore, would be your current employer, BMW. How do they help you at Bridge Tech? Do they partner with Bridge Tech? And if so, how do they, are there any fast track programs where your students from Bridge Tech can then intern or work with BMW or like-minded corporations that work alongside with you?
Yes and no. They've asked, I always refuse because I don't want a conflict of interest. I do have a lot of the students that work with me at BMW that volunteer for me at Bridge Tech, but I try not to mix or ask for funding. I would say this, for the GEs, the Michelins, and these like companies, we have placed several students in those facilities. And they have sponsored us greatly. I'm not saying BMW wouldn't. I just, from my point of view, wouldn't accept it just because I don't want a conflict of interest on that. But they definitely love our students. I can attest to that.
Ben, you have a question for Derrick?
Yes, for Mr. Evans, in your documentary, Come Hell or High Water, The Battle for Turkey Creek, we are told of a story of a predominantly Black community that has found itself up against big business and money interests. So how do marginalized and lower income communities such as Turkey Creek, how are they able to find manageable and cost-efficient ways to legally battle wealthy and powerful corporations and shareholder interests who wish to continue to develop the city of Gulfport at the expense of Turkey Creek residents and those in the surrounding vicinity?
Well, there's an old adage that says, if you want to go fast, travel alone. And if you want to go far, travel together. And when you realize, as we did, the range and the depth of the community threats from every angle. I mean, every angle. I don't think anything was left out. We realized that when we weren't at the table, we had been on the menu, and that it was actually at this point more important to not be at the table, but to set the table. And so Turkey Creek Community Initiatives was organized to serve as a catalyst or a convener or a bridger, a joiner of stakeholders and allies from near and far who could together put up a sustained and successful and solutions-based, usually, challenge to this onslaught of very powerful and unchecked political and financial capital. And in doing so, I think in changing the narrative and also in having a very inclusive and eclectic, powerful roster of allied communities, neighborhoods, but also attorneys, planners, architects, historians, interdisciplinary scholars, again, from near and far. I think that is really what built us up into the type of a community ongoing movement that could win this ultimately, as opposed to winning part and being defeated anyway by some other part or parts that we just didn't have the capacity or the time or even the awareness yet to address. And that's why the TCCI's mission is so broad and ambitious and could never carry it out on its own. And it speaks to something that I often speak about with Harold Mitchell and Mustafa sometimes when we have chats over the phone about this, I think this philosophy that we share about finding and unseparating the powers and the resources. You know, we talk about the separated powers of government, but it's really the unseparated use of those various, diverse powers that all of our communities need at this hour. And I think that's the key. Yeah, and it mitigates a lot of capacity as well as financial issues when you have community accountable and competent partners and allies, some of whom are whom you want to receive the funding to do what they do very well, but to do it here.
I did want to pivot back to Mr. Moore. It looks like we have a question in the chat. M. Collier says they love the idea of a STEM camp. Approaching solutions to environmental justice must include education for our youth. The question is, what is one example of how your work with the youth have addressed an environmental justice issue in one of the communities? Do your students serve as advocates for any environmental justice issues such as health, environment, or economics, et cetera?
Yes, again, as I mentioned earlier, the wind turbine project was one of our first initiative into that. And that was the first introduction for renewable energy for us. But part of that construction and build of that wind turbine, we also learned and taught our kids about all facets of renewable energy, whether it was geothermal, solar, and such. So what our students learned is that Earth has limited resources. Sustainability is more than just turning on the light switch and hoping somebody pay the bills. It's about how we come up with solutions that can help the next generation or their kids get away from our current situation. So for me, our goal has always been to bridge the problem with the solution, and in the middle is education. And so at that point, we actually use that curriculum to do that. So we learn more than about just building a wind turbine. We also learn about the whole environmental aspect and what renewable energy in general was about.
Thank you.
Then are you passing the mic back?
Yeah, yep, we had a few more questions, but I'd like to pass the mic back to you for a second.
All right, so I'll ask a question and then why don't you come right back with the next set of questions for folks. So brothers, I'd like to actually talk a little bit about policy because we know policy can do some transformational things or it can do some very damaging things. And, you know, I think most of the folks who are watching, not all of them, because we have both domestic and international folks who watch the series, have at least some understanding of redlining, some of the zoning things that are going on, restrictive covenants, these things that have intentionally disinvested in our communities, blocked our communities, policy around transportation and housing, and how in many instances, you know, our communities are built on floodplains or in some of the most dangerous locations. But we also have the opportunity in this moment. We have a president, you know, and currently a set of folks on Capitol Hill who say that they care about our communities and have introduced some things. And many of the agencies and departments are now starting to be a bit more focused. So I'm curious, with the work, Jimmy, I'll come to you, and then Derrick, I'll come to you. What policies would be helpful in helping with the work that you do and the vision that you have around the clean economy or addressing environmental injustices?
Well, let me start out with the negative when we start talking about policy. I never see any policy notes or policy books, the KPIs, the key performance indicator that says, okay, this is the goal, this is what we're trying to achieve, and this is the benchmark or the metric we're going to use to judge it. I think too many times, especially in our community, we waste resources that we can utilize them much better. And I say this, that we need to do more together. I think collaboration is a word we like to throw around, but it's one of the things that we do less. And I'm hoping policy can help us bridge that. For me, COVID was a blessing. It hurt us initially, but what we was able to do is build a lot of curriculums around virtual. So now we have teams of students and all throughout the state, of both states, and they all getting certifications, they all learning from each other, and that's a beautiful thing. And so we're able to share a lot more. And I don't see that in policy. I see a lot of, okay, this is how you apply, it's a lot of red tape. And I'm an engineer. I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm the weakest when it comes to this part of it. I'm very weak when it comes to going out the grants and talk, but I can go talk technical and talk about STEM. I can talk about that all day. But when you start getting me to understand what's wanted for the government or from the city or from that, sometimes I just feel like the way it's written, they don't know what they want. So it's kind of hard for me to address those things. So that's from me personally, from an organization point of view.
I got you. Derrick, I know you steeped in policy. You've seen it in so many different applications and aspects. Walk us through some things.
Yeah, let me just say, you know, most of the communities that we're talking about are in the dire circumstances and situations that they're in because of where they're located. They tend to be in states or municipalities or counties that are themselves challenged by decades and even centuries of poverty, slow economic growth, culturally normalized behaviors that are not good for the environment or for people. And so when at the top level, you know, policy, good policy even, is sort of teased out and worked out and put out the door and then funded, it typically doesn't include adequate oversight or enforcement provisions, particularly with any kind of community participation on that end, to make sure that the policy doesn't effectively achieve what the policy originators had hoped it would correct, but instead it worsens. And an example is, let's take the state of Mississippi. I mean, it's the so-called poorest state in the country with all of these like last place social and health indicators, right? And when there's a a policy or a federal funding windfall in the wake of a Hurricane Katrina, or in the wake of an oil spill, or with an infrastructure bill, or what have you. The very powerful, very small political and economic development elites very, carefully are prepared, poised, and very good at turning that policy and that funding stream to further advance existing goals that they had, right? That just simply needed money, right? That they now have. And the way that federalism works, the federal government sends the money to the states, and the states figure out how to use it. And the states, like I said, privilege and prioritize some of the electeds and the it's like I said, those almost like career drivers of a bus that's going backwards. And for instance, I just recently learned that the Gulfport Biloxi International Airport, which is in my backyard, and who we work with sometimes, for habitat restoration on their property and so forth and so on, has been awarded a Federal Restore Act funded grant to fill in 130 acres of wetlands. That's not the purpose of the restore. So, we're vigilant about that, but we need some help from the policy makers, the policy oversight, the policy enforcers. I could give 100 other examples. But that's how that typically can work, particularly in a place that has perennial natural and man-made disasters and so forth and so on. And then you have, like I said, these leadership, traditional, not very imaginative or risk-taking elites who just see it as another windfall of cash to further advance pre-existing bad values and priorities about community development, even though they use our circumstances, like being blown out of the water by Hurricane Katrina, or having this level of employment or unemployment, or that level of incarceration, or that level of education, and take these federal dollars as, it's a trough is what it is, surrounded by pigs.
All right, we can't get
Dr. Ali, can I say something on top of that? Because he was absolutely right. I'm gonna give you another specific example. The opportunity zone. Both of my facilities are in the opportunity zone, but if you look at how it's written and how they're using it, that's not what his intention was. There's no acceptance criteria for policies. They find nuanced ways, like Deb just said a second ago, where it's used in a way that's different from what it was intended to do. And I don't think there's no recourse for that, or there's no repetition, no way of taking the money back or doing something with that. It's just, we just chalk it up as that's the way it is. And that's unfortunate.
Yeah, without a doubt. I know we don't have a huge amount of time, but there are ways, if the federal government decides to pull money back, that they can. The question is, as you raised, Jimmy, in many instances, the will is not there to do the right thing when we have those types of situations. I know that Ben had another question that came in through the chat that he wanted to share with folks and walk through. Ben?
Yes, so Shelby Patterson says, hello, gentlemen. Thank you for speaking with us today. I'm a proud native of Columbia, South Carolina, and a public school educator and advocate. I'm currently studying for my degree in public policy. How can people like me who don't have a background in the STEM and environmental sciences fields support and help the cause? I want to learn more, and how do I start?
That's a very good question, and an important one for someone in that situation to be asking now. And my short answer to that would be to use every opportunity that you have in your education and training and in this time in your life to see if some of it can be utilized with immersing yourself in a community or an endeavor that is at the nexus of what we're talking about. that is greatly in need and whose needs have largely precipitated certain policy discussions, actions, and funding streams, but also on the receiving end are urgently, in need of that, but also almost systemically denied the blessings of the blessing that their needfulness helped to induce. And I think you would best learn that through immersion and participation with some really great people in some really important grassroots level work that, like I said, is directly located at the nexus of ideally multiple concurrent policy implementations.
From my side, I would just say volunteer. Try to volunteer with a company or organization that's willing to set up to listen to your ideas. I think because most of it, now I will have to say from my organization, policy is not our strong point. For someone like you to volunteer and bring that expertise will be very wealthy, especially for those that are willing to listen, because I think that's what a lot of our organization is actually missing. We have a few people that really understand policy, and I think that's definitely need to be spread among. So I would say volunteer. I would love to have you or someone like you for sure, because that's definitely a weakness on our side.
Thank you, Ben. Out of this particular conversation, the questions that Ben asked, and American University and the Sine Institute, have allowed us to have this platform to have these conversations. What role do you see academic institutions, our colleges and universities, how can they be better, authentic collaborative partners in the processes that we're working on? So let me, Jimmy, I'll just come straight to you because I know you've got some relationships there and you also have some ideas about how folks could do things better.
Yep. Well, the history of especially HBCUs has always been to work with the community. For some reason, we've gotten away from that. Things like doing research, doing analysis, doing samplings. That's something that the university can do. But I think the politics in these so-called institutional policies is starting to prevent that. So I think we need to come back to that holistic and start going back to a community-based research where these universities come back to the community and give back. And I'm doing a lot with this with the universities I'm dealing with. I do come with them with real world problems. I try to solve things that's in our community. But at the same time, it's hard, specifically with A&T. It's a very large, very proud institution. I'm sure it's got a lot of people pulling at them. But at the same time, it should be some obligation from that institution to be able to give back and to do things with these communities, because they do have a lot of expertise from the staff level, from their advanced graduate level, and all the way down to the undergraduate level, which need these opportunities to go and see real world problems. And I think that would be a great bridge for that.
Definitely. Derrick?
Yeah, I spent years teaching at a HWCU in Boston, historically white, which was Boston College. And I've since in Mississippi worked quite a bit with folks from HBCUs and other and local HWCUs. And across the board, I think, and I knew, and this sort of reverberates from my experience years ago in Boston College, is that all of these institutions need to empower rather than constrain those faculty members and students who seek to have and to contribute and build, through authentic relationships with these communities and these projects. Like any human relationship, it's about the people conducting the relationship, not their logo, not the institutional identity that adds or diminishes to the value of that relationship. So I think that, they can all do better. And some do, we've been fortunate here in having some long-standing relationships with faculty members and their students and their classes, that sometimes the institution or the university that they're affiliated with is less attentive to their work, less expanding and supportive of their work until and unless, again, there's a windfall of interest and resources for that, say, climate change or what have you. And then instead of saying, hey, go drill deeper, go broader with what you've been doing, they actually generally seek to control it more from a higher level within the institution and constrain it and make it be about what the university or the school sees as its best opportunity for getting this funding or sustaining this funding or this opportunity. And the people within the institution and within the communities and the issues that they're working on often suffer.
Yep.
Thank you both for that. I've had so many conversations with folks, where when we're in graduate school, we have to do capstones, to finish out degrees. And why aren't we focused on these real world sets of opportunities and examples that are going on, building those? So many of the students, rightly think that they have to have an internship at EPA or an internship at the State Department or a number of other places. All have value, but we should also be having those internships and fellowships that are living inside of these amazing projects that are going on the ground. It changes the dynamic of how information becomes alive for you when you actually are able to learn by seeing and doing, and then applying that back to what we learned in those books and through seminars and a number of other things. I want to transition just a tiny bit, although it's connected, and I know we only have a short amount of time. Y'all remember that movie, Jerry Maguire, for those who are old enough to remember, when when Cuba Gooding says, "Show me the money," right? And we're often expected to do work in our communities through our own blood, sweat, and tears without there being any dollars associated or significant dollars being associated to make transformation happen. In this moment, we now got, $1 trillion bills that have been passed and hundreds of billions of dollars that are moving for a number of different issues. So I want to go directly, Jimmy, to the work that you're doing, with the significant amounts of money that are moving and your focus on creating these economic opportunities around whether it is the climate economy or a couple of the other paradigms you operate with. What types of resources do you want to be able to access to really make the things that you're doing grow and to help make real change happen inside of communities? And then I'm going to come to you, Derrick, with the same question.
Oh, that's a great question. I'll be very specific on that. One of my major initiatives now, and I think you and I talked about this, Dr. Mustafa, is that Soul City, North Carolina, I know a good bit of you guys may have heard it, with Lord McKenzie, had a great plan. He's done some great work. The more I learned about it, the more I fell in love with it. But right now in that one community, the prison system is the largest employer. I plan on changing that. But what they have agreed with me with that count is that I was able to acquire 28 acres to build this new economy. It's not an economy for just Soul City. It's not an economy just for the US. It's more global. And one of the things that we concentrating on with this new bill, and back to your policy, is that we would like to micro manufacturing some EV chargers. I already have connections in overseas and doing some EKDs or some select things, but that's the whole goal there. And we're actually going to train students, both there and globally, how these things work from install to monitoring. And we would like to work with communities like Derrick's and like these other communities across, so we can share this knowledge and bring economic impact so we can go after these dollars holistically together. So that's what we're doing there. And I'm very excited about Soul City. I'm very excited about the opportunity that I have there. in what we bring in there. So that's specifically what I would like to see, and what I would like to talk about is how do I get access to those funding, and how can our students be able to engage that from this point going forward, that generational knowledge and wealth.
Derrick, I used to lead the Interagency Working Group. That was 17 federal agencies, a couple White House offices. Every one of those federal agencies have had some have had a significant and others have had a moderate increase in their budgets. All of them, or the majority of them, are now talking more about environmental justice and climate justice based upon the work that you do. And I know your work is, yes, in Turkey Creek, but the vision is for communities across the Gulf South and so many other locations. What are the resources that you're looking to be able to utilize, and how do you make sure there's real accountability in that?
Well, first, let me say that interagency working group, Mustafa, that you and I were so deeply involved in here locally and nationally was by far, hands down, the best model ever for orienting these multiple agencies interfacing with one another in communities where their collaborative presence, even if it was just listening, was so important. And one of the reasons is, particularly as it comes back to money issues, I confess that folks like me, or at least me, suffer from a certain, what I might call a schizophrenia between kiddie pool money and Olympic pool money. Olympic pool money is like these big, massive, 7-digit numbers, for infrastructure, this road, that highway, this wetland fill, this whatever. And then the money to do our printing, pay folk to do community work, keep the lights on, things like that. And those are two concurrent challenges. And when I say schizophrenia, it is like schizophrenia in that, there's only 24 hours in a day, and we have to be, and something like the interagency group is helpful because it will steer the community and the community-based organizations resources that they wouldn't necessarily know about or to avail for themselves in their work. But they are also served, just their very presence helps to put a check or an oversight, the thought of enforcement in the minds of those in the Olympic pool of money, who we also want to make sure we're very clear and effective in determining how that is and is not spent. So yeah, the money problem is two-tiered, and I wish we had this interagency working group up and running. I mean, it was great.
I appreciate that. As we close out, I want to make sure that we are ending on a high note, because everything that you all have been discussing and sharing is really about how transformation is happening. Even though we've been rooted in a number of disinvestments and a number of other dynamics that place real challenges on our communities. Jimmy, I'm curious, in 30 seconds, your vision as we move forward. If we look back 5 years from now, maybe we say 10 years, what do you hope to have been able to accomplish, and what changes do you see inside of our most vulnerable communities if we're able to be successful in some of the things we've discussed today?
For me, I don't see nothing but optimism for the future. I think we are in a great place to capitalize with the climate change and technology bridge. I think our community is going to be the biggest benefactor, because we're not weighted down with that old infrastructure, that old train of thought. We basically starting from a clean scratch, to be honest with you, because we never had nothing before. And so we are able to take advantage of these new improved technologies, these new and improved ways of doing things that the others would have to scrap, basically what we call sunk cost, to start over and do. So I'm very optimistic. I just think we need to get our most valuable resources engaged, which is our youth, to help our community to do these things. That's what I'm 100% engaged in, is help you get with your youth in your community to change your community.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Derrick.
Yeah, I hope that if we are successful in the next 10 years in consolidating and growing our, our visions or our grasps of what I have loosely called, sort of the previous best practices or Old Testament, like the Interagency working group, and consolidate that with some of these, younger initiatives and younger people and newly involved institutions and so forth and so on, so that in a way that doesn't just change or add a broader narrative, but changes norms. But because we succeed in modeling or lifting up what works, what has worked, we don't have to reinvent certain wheels. And that's often, that's one of the ways in which history can easily trip its own self up. And we see it all the time, particularly in policy implementation at the ground, or even in policy development. But I'm optimistic that in 10 years, this high level of energy and these better ideas and these programs like this, which were not once possible, right? This gathering here today will change the norms, and hopefully in time to save us all.
Well, I appreciate both of you, along with Harold, for the amazing work that you're doing. I hope folks will, one, do the research and learn more about each and every one of these projects that we talked about today. And don't just stop with the learning of that. Pick up the phone, send an email, and engage with the leaders that you see here today about how we can, one, better support, but also how we can also exponentially grow these examples across our country. And that's how we really make change happen. I'm going to leave y'all with the words of my grandmother, who says that when you know better, do better. You've got some information now. We know how we can actually create transformative change if we are willing to prioritize it, if we are willing to lean in, and if we are willing to actually be willing to roll up our sleeves and get some things done through authentic collaborative partnerships. I want to thank both the Sine Institute for Policy and Politics. I want to thank American University. Of course, I'll thank my guests again. And I also want to thank each and every one of you for following this series. This is the 5th in our series on fighting for environmental justice and climate justice in the 21st century. And this particular seminar focused on revitalizing vulnerable communities. Our 6th and final series will be next week, where we will be sharing with you amazing, truly amazing, transformative young leaders from across the country and how they are embracing this moment and really just doing some amazing things. So I want to thank each and every one of you. And with that being said, always remember to stay blessed, highly favored, and also don't forget that you have power unless you give it away. I'm Dr. Mustafa Santiago Ali.